Ladies and gentlemen, Primetime CP23 here. As you can see on screen, patch notes for patch 2.6.1 have now gone live on the PTR, and holy crap, the buffs are real. Now, I personally have only been playing Diablo Diablo 3, since Season 8. Season 8 was my first season. I started about halfway through Season 8. But I have never seen a wave of buffs like this. So many things received buffs, and as far as I can tell, very, very, very few things received nerfs. So we're going to jump right into it. First off, for Barbarian, by the way, is getting... Barbarian's getting hooked up here. If some of these buffs stick, I could legitimately see Barbarian climbing out of the gutter as far as being just factually the worst solo class. I don't know for positive that it's going to happen, but it's pretty crazy here. So, the Battle Rage skill with the Bloodshed rune has been redesigned. It's now going to deal damage equal to 20% of your recent critical hits to enemies within 20 yards every 1 second. I think that's a buff. I don't know for positive. I'll have to play with it a little bit. But I think that's a buff. And then the Blessed Hammer skill with the Limitless rune has also been redesigned so that your Blessed Hammers gain 640% weapon damage as holy, and increases the area of effect to 20 yards. I wonder if they finally fixed the sound glitch on there. That's what I wonder. Command Skeletons had a couple changes here. The Devour rune Voracious resource cost reduction stacks granted from this rune will now stack and are no longer overridden from multiple casts. Simulacrum, it's now going to glow on screen when Simulacrum is active, which is good. Skeletal Mages are now going to display the duration of the oldest mage so that you don't have to just guess when your mages are about to expire. Bone Armor, the essence cost has been removed, which is awesome. I kind of wonder if a generator necromancer is finally going to be viable, and you can now cast it while moving, which I don't know that really matters that much, but anyway. The Frozen Army rune on Army of the Dead, pulsing damage has been spread out. Supposedly they finally fixed the Fueled by Death passive for the Necromancer. Soul Harvest for Witch Doctor, they've fixed that so that every time you add a new stack of Soul Harvest, it refreshes all stacks instead of just refreshing the one stack. There's a bug fix on Army of the Dead, and an issue where monsters were healing themselves with the Leech Curse. It's a bug fix with Arcane Orb, and a couple bug fixes with Skeletal Mages, and fixed a connection issue when people are channeling skills. Okay, so here we go. We're starting right off with the Barbarian. Bracers of Destruction, which are the Seismic Slam bracers, as you can see, just had a straight buff to the first 5 enemies hit. Bracers of the First Men, Hammer of the Ancients is going to attack 50% faster still, and that damage has been buffed. I don't think that matters. In my opinion, the Hammer of the Ancients is a fun build, but completely unviable. I do not think that's going to change. It's going to reduce Fury of the Vanished Peak, which off the top of my head I have no idea what that item is. It's going to reduce the Fury cost of Seismic Slam by 50%. It's going to increase the damage of it by 400 to 500% also, which is awesome. Gavel of Judgment is another Hammer of the Ancients ability, and it's going to now buff the damage by 400 to 500%, and it's going to mean that you always return 25 Fury instead of rolling on a scale when you hit 3 or fewer enemies. That's good. I don't think that's going to be viable, but that's another story. So Girdle of Giants, Seismic Slam damage is going to increase Earthquake damage by now 200 to 250% for 3 seconds. That's literally just doubling the buff that it increased. Skull Grasp is going to increase the damage of Whirlwind by now 400 to 500%. That is huge. And we'll talk more about Whirlwind here in just a little bit. As well, the Standoff. Furious Charge now deals increased damage equal to up to 400 to 500% of your bonus movement speed. It's awesome. It's good stuff. Very good stuff. The more Barbarian sets that get buffed, the better. Personally, I think that they should have focused more on Whirlwind and Leapquake, as those are the 2 main Barbarian builds. People still play Charge Barb, but not very many people. Not compared to who's playing Leapquake and Whirlwind. But my understanding is that that Season 12 is going to give players the Immortal Kings set, which is a charge set, so kind of makes sense. Crusader, Blade of Prophecy now increases damage of Condemn by 350 to 450%. Braces of Fury is buffing damage on Heaven's Fury. Denial is now getting a pretty significant buff to the damage increase on Sweep Attack. Here's the big one, Faithful Memory. The weapon that made Blessed Hammer builds a thing again is getting even stronger. So, each enemy hit by Falling Sword increases the damage of Blessed Hammer by now 60 to 80% for 10 seconds, max of 10 stacks. So, just so that everybody's on the same page, if you hit 10 enemies with your Falling Sword, enemies are now going to be taking up to 800% additional damage from your Blessed Hammers. That's huge. That's approximately a 200% damage buff. I don't know exactly how many Greater Rift levels that's going to be, but that's a pretty big buff. Definitely very notable. Fate of the Fell kind of been changed over. Fader's Wrath has also kind of been reworked a little bit, so that Condemn is going to have its damage increased by 450 to 600%. However you pronounce that, it's going to increase Blessed Shield damage. However you pronounce that is going to have Blessed Shield damage increased as well. Now, for the Demon Hunter, the Dead Man's Legacy. The hype about this is that multi-shot might be viable. I hope it's viable, at least for T13 farming. If nothing else, I don't necessarily need to be able to push with multi-shot, but I would love to be able to at least do T13 speed farming with multi-shot. Hopefully this will help. So Dead Man's Legacy is no longer going to have multi-shot damage as an affix that takes up one of the roles, and now it's going to be a straight damage buff to enemies below 60% health. Enemies below 60% health are now going to get hit twice, and the damage is going to be increased to up to 150%. That's pretty significant. Carly's Point has kind of been reworked. Now it will always return 15 hatred if it hits an enemy that's already been impaled, and the damage of impale has been buffed by up to 80%. Awesome, awesome, awesome stuff. I don't know exactly how big a buff that is. I don't know, if that's going to lead to clears that are, 1 or 2 greater ifs higher. But anyway you look at it, it's good stuff. The Manticore is now going to reduce hatred cost of Cluster Arrow by 50%, and it's going to increase the damage by up to 300%. And here we go. Yang's Recurve attacks 50% faster, has its damage increased by up to 150%. It's pretty hype. Pretty hype. Alrighty, and we are just about halfway through these buffs, which is crazy since we've been going for almost 12 minutes now. I'm going to take a little drink here. Alrighty, right back into it with the Monk. Monk is, from my understanding, going to be receiving the Juliana's Stratagem set, which is the Exploding Palm build. And I'm pretty hype because Binding of the Lost, the 7-sided strike belt, it's getting a moderate damage reduction buff, which is good. Balance, damage of a Tempest Rush is going to be increased, which is good. Fist of Aztarask, Exploding Palms on death damage is increased to up to 500%, which is awesome. Again, absolutely great stuff. Hopefully going to be able to make Uliana's viable, at least for clearing a GR70. If you can clear a GR70 with Uliana's, I'm hype. I am already kind of thinking, like before these buffs were announced, I was already kind of thinking that I wanted to play Monk in Season 12. My thought on that is, getting even stronger. Incense Torch of the Grand Temple. It's going to reduce the spirit cost of Way of the Light by up to 50% now. And it's going to increase the damage by 450 to 500%. Awesome stuff. And Scarbringer is also getting buffed. Damage on Lashing Tail Kick is now going to be increased by up to 600%. If you get a 600% damage buff on Scarbringer, that's going to be literally doubling the damage bonus that you already had on the Scarbringer. That is pretty freaking ridiculous because, LTK was already one of the strongest Monk builds. It's just not as strong as Rainman of 1,000 Storms or In a Generator. But who knows? Literally anything could happen. I'm really excited to see all of these new buffs in effect. We're actually going to skip Necromancer completely because we're already at almost 15 minutes. And as you can see, there's a lot. So I'll be making a whole separate video on the Necromancer changes, balance changes, so as to hopefully keep this video a little shorter. I think it's still going to be probably about 25 minutes because we're still... we've still got a lot to cover. Witch Doctor buffs. Kali Jungle Wraps. Firebats is now going to deal 250 to 300% increased damage, straight damage buff. Mask of Jerem, pets are going to deal more damage, straight damage buff. Staff of Chiroptera, something. Words are fun. Fire bats gonna attack 100% faster still. They're gonna cost now 75% less mana, and it's gonna have a damage buff of up to 200%. So they're also trying to make Erekir's fire bats even stronger because it wasn't already one of the best Witch Doctor builds in the game. Short Man's Finger just kind of changed the wording on it. Now your 3 smaller gargantuans are each going to have a 500 to 650% damage buff. Moving on to the Wizard, Orb of Infinite Depth. Explosive blast damage is going to be increased by over double what it originally was. And your damage reduction is going to be increased by 20% now for up to 4 stacks. Ransler's Folly, Energy Twister, now does 225 to 300% more damage, in addition to pulling in lesser enemies. Triumvirate, Offhand. Your signature spells are now going to increase the damage of Arcane Orb by 300 to 400% for up to 6 seconds. Unstable Scepter. Damage of Arcane Orb is now increased by 350 to 450%, and its explosion triggers have an additional time. Sorry about that, been talking for 17 minutes. Wand of Woe. Damage of Explosive Blast is now increased by 300 to 400% damage. 300 to 400%, which is good. Means, plain and simple, the Explosive Blast builds are going to be stronger, which is good. It's always good to have another speed farm build. Alrighty. Moving on to the set items. This is where things get pretty hype. So Immortal King's Call, the 6-piece set bonus. While you have Wrath of the Berserker and Call of the Ancients active, you now get almost double what you got before on a damage buff. I don't know why they wouldn't just make it a 600% damage buff, but that's not really my call. Might of the Earth. This one's pretty hype. This one's pretty hype indeed. So now, instead of just Earthquake, Avalanche, and Leap, you also get damage buffs on Ground Stomp, Ancient Spear, and Seismic Slam. The damage of all of those attacks is now going to be 3,000%. That is a massive, massive buff. And I can't wait to see how many Greater Rift levels higher Barbarian will now be able to go. I mean, obviously the trend on all of everything that we've talked about is making Greater Rift levels go higher and higher and higher, and it's gonna get pretty crazy next season. Legacy of Raykor, the Furious Charge still gains every rune on the 4-piece, and now it'll deal 500% increased damage. It's cool. And the 6-piece bonus had its damage buff doubled. Here we go. Wrath of the Wastes. Whirlwind gains the effect of every rune, or gains the effect of the Dust Devil's rune, and all whirlwind damage is increased by 1,700%. So, Whirlwind, which was already arguably the best solo build for the Barbarian, is now having its damage more than doubled between this and the Skull's Grasp buff. It's awesome. Might of the Earth. it's gaining a bunch of extra attacks that you already use in Might of the Earth builds. Like, a Might of the Earth build is always going to use Earthquake, Leap, and either Ancient Spear or Seismic Slam. Most of them use Ground Stomp, and because of Blade of the Tribes, you get avalanche damage every time you use one of your shouts. This is pretty ridiculous because now more things get a big damage buff with Might of the Earth, and the damage buff almost tripled. And then we have Wrath of the Wastes, which those are the two best solo builds for Barbarian. Now Wrath of the Wastes is getting a more than double damage bonus as well. I think Blizzard wants Barbarian to do a little better. Crusader is kind of reworking some sets as well. While Akarat's the Armor of Akan 6-piece bonus, when Akarat's champion is active, you now get a 900% increased damage, and you take 20% less damage. Okay, it's pretty good. Thorns of the Invoker had a significant damage buff to the 2-piece set, and the 6-piece set got a double damage bonus. On to Demon Hunter, where the embodiment of the Marauder is now a 21% damage buff, 2100% damage buff, excuse me. Natalia's is by far the most underwhelming buff on this list, because Natalia's, after casting Rain of Vengeance, deal 750% increased damage. That's very, 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 very underwhelming, because much like the Uliana Stratagem set for the Monk, Natalia's is strictly one of the worst builds in the game. And I think to make Natalia's viable, they really needed to buff Rain of Vengeance damage to, I would say, probably at least 1500%. So the Natalia's buff is very underwhelming in my opinion. But Unhallowed Essence also gains a damage buff. Your generators Multi-Shot and Vengeance now deal 70% increased damage for every point of discipline. It's a pretty big buff. Again, I don't know exactly, how many GR levels that's going to equate to, but that's a pretty big buff. The Sun Wukong set, aka Monkey King's Garb, has also been kind of redesigned. So now, Lashing Tail Kick, Tempest Rush, and Wave of Light, instead of consuming a stack of Sweeping Wind, they are now going to have their end dealing, I think it was like 1200% damage for every time you consumed a stack. I'd have to look it up to know for positive, but I think that's what it was. Now, instead, they will not consume stacks of anything, and they will have a 600% damage buff for each stack of Sweeping Wind you have. This makes the Vengeful Wind weapon, fist weapon, damn near mandatory. Because now, because with the Vengeful Wind, you're going to get up to 7 additional stacks. If you have 10 stacks of Sweeping Wind up at all times, that's a 6,000% damage. This is going to get nerfed. Just plain and simple, this is going to get nerfed or reworked before the end of the PTR. There is no way that this is going to go live in season 12 like this. It's too ridiculous. As for Uliana's Stratagem, 7-sided strike is now going to deal 777% of its normal damage with each hit, which is a pretty big damage buff, as well as increasing the damage of Exploding Palm by 1,800%. That's a pretty big buff as well. Again, moving on past Necromancer, we'll get into all that in a separate video. For the Witch Doctor, the Helltooth Harness has kind of changed. I would almost say that the 2-piece bonus was nerfed, because now instead of everything taking 20% increased damage from your attacks for 10 seconds, they just take the 1,500% weapon damage every second. So I don't know for sure if that's a nerf. I think technically that would be a nerf. But it doesn't really matter, because after casting Wall of Death, you're now going to get 1,700% increased damage. As for the Raiment of the Jade Harvester, Jade Harvester is now going to, when you haunt an enemy that has already been haunted, it's now going to deal 480 seconds worth of haunt damage instantly. It's a pretty big buff. And Soul Harvest consumes your damage over time effects on enemies, instantly dealing it 1,200 seconds worth of remaining damage. That's also a pretty big damage buff. For the Wizard, Firebird's Finery, your damage is going to be increased by up to 200% now. And Veer's Amazing Arcana, instead of getting 1 stack for hitting with an Arcana ability, you now gain 2 stacks for hitting with an Arcana ability for the 6-piece bonus. Alrighty, and then we've got a couple bug fixes, but we're actually going to go over those in the next video, because this video is already 27 minutes long. So, in review here, buffs for everyone. Everyone gets buffs. You get a buff, and you get a buff, and you get a buff, and you get a buff. Blizzard just went full Oprah. So ladies and gentlemen, until next time, this is Primetime CP23, and I'm out.